Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of GeoPath. I'm your host Dylan Woods. Today's episode we're going to discuss the recent developments that have occurred within the geopolitical sphere. Over the past week or so, there are a couple of things that have occurred, a couple of developments that I want to delve into a little bit deeper today. Let's start with the Ukrainian theater, where the Russians have ramped up their strike packages in recent days and recent weeks due to the persistent shortage of Patriot interceptors in the Ukrainian arsenal. And that stands as quite a vulnerability as of this moment in time, especially given the fact that the Russians now not just rely upon their own missile arsenal, but also that of the North Koreans. North Korean missileers and engineers are building bases around Moscow district or within proximity of Moscow district to boost the Russian front lines with North Korean missiles. Those missiles are both ballistic and cruise missiles that we're talking about. We're currently talking about a couple hundreds that have currently been deployed towards Russian forces and are currently actively being launched towards Ukrainian settlements, Ukrainian positions and Ukrainian cities. And that number is sure to ramp up if the North Koreans are indeed able to build infrastructure within Russia that can produce these missiles persistently and consistently in order to bolster not just Russia's ballistic and cruise missile arsenal, but also allow the Russians to maintain their strategic reserve of said missiles. Obviously, that stands as quite a dire precedent for NATO, which will most certainly feel the effect of said missiles in any potential conflict with the Russian armed forces. So what we're seeing here is a deepening strategic cooperation between North Korea and Russia. We know of the strategic pact, both these countries, security pact, both these countries have forged with each other. And once again, we're seeing the fruits of that taking place right here, right in front of our very eyes. Not just through the support in terms of ballistic missiles and cruise missiles, but also in active personnel. There's talk of approximately 30 to 50,000 North Korean soldiers that are deploying towards Russia in these weeks, in the coming weeks, in order to not just bolster the front lines, but also bolster the Russian rear, which is currently feeling the effect of Ukrainian strike campaigns that have amplified over the course of the past few weeks and months. So this deepening partnership allows Russia at the very least some leeway, some breathing room in order to regenerate, in order to allow for some flexibility pertaining to its infrastructure and defense industrial base, as it is trying to figure out ways on how to counter the Ukrainian strike campaigns, how to increase the efficiency of their own strike campaign, and how to turn the tides along the front lines, meaning systematically reinstall maneuver warfare towards these front lines as to take territory and increase the rate of advancements, which obviously as of this point in time is severely lacking, not just on the Russian side, by the way, but on the Ukrainian side as well. So Russia is trying to break that status quo by any means necessary. So what Ukraine needs, first and foremost, is an increased number of Patriot interceptors. Here's the problem with that. The US has wasted pretty much half of their Patriot stockpile in the Iran war by using them to shoot down $20,000-$30,000 drones instead of ballistic missiles and cruise missiles that they were intended for. So by such a blatantly misuse of these high-end, high-cost systems, not only the US now finds itself as a deficit, but its entire network of allies with it. And we're seeing the ripples of that all across the globe. South Korea faces a similar problem. Some stockpiles of Patriot interceptors were drawn from South Korea to be deployed into the Middle Eastern theater due to the persistent Iranian threat, leaving South Korea with a depleted arsenal of Patriot interceptors, the one they desperately need in any eventual potential conflict with North Korea, China, and or a combination of. So, as well as in Europe, obviously, now the Ukrainians are facing a shortage. The European allies of Ukraine are digging into their own reserves to keep supplying these systems, but those reserves are nowhere deep enough in order to fully make up for the salvos that the Russians and North Koreans, as of this moment in time, can launch towards Ukraine. So once again, it comes down to an industrial deficit that is still across the Western Hemisphere, across the Western world, across the Western bloc, let's say, that is still not being sufficiently addressed. We can talk about, and I've said this multiple times before on this channel, guys, you can watch all my other clips back. This is not just a matter, European, NATO, Western deterrence in general, is not just a matter of increasing defense budget. It has very little to do with it. It's about ramping up industrial processes, bureaucratic processes, as to persistently ramping up production rates, so that we can actively prepare for wartime scenarios. What we're doing now, what the Western world has been doing for the past, not just years, but decades, is invest into these high-end, next-generation systems that take years and years and years to build. And yes, are very technologically advanced, have an array, a myriad of capacities, abilities, and capabilities designated to them, but cannot be produced en masse in order, at the very least, not at the rate necessary to sustain a prolonged war or attritional campaign. And that is one, if not the greatest vulnerability in current Western deterrence and security posturing. And we're seeing examples of this, not just within the Western Hemisphere, but all across the globe, pertaining to Western allies such as South Korea, and the Gulf states as well, for that matter. So the Ukrainians have two choices. They either deplete the reserves of their European allies, which, like I said, is nowhere deep enough to address this particular problem, or they come up with their own ballistic missile interceptors, ramp up the production for that, or at the very least come with a cost-efficient, let's say, mediocre solution, mediocre short to mid-term solution to these problems, so that at the very least they can mitigate the damage to the critical energy infrastructure come winter of 2026, 2027, a window that Russia will most surely utilize to ramp up their strike campaigns, to ramp up their strike packages, in order to further deplete Ukrainian energy infrastructure and thereby Ukrainian societal and economic resilience. So now let's cross over to the Middle Eastern theater for a bit here. Now there are two countries I want to talk about primarily. Iran, obviously, and Iraq. Let's start with Iran. Obviously, developments are still occurring. The war, if you can call it a war, that is, the conflict, well, the persistent conflict with the United States is still ongoing. The quadrillion of negotiation rounds have currently passed the review, and once again we're currently engaged in another round of talks, mediations, negotiations with the Islamic Republic of Iran that will, just as all the other rounds before it, will bear no fruits. And in the meantime, Iran is allowed to adjust, to adapt, to make itself a significantly harder target for any future eventual potential rounds of fighting. And one of the ways in which it has done that is put a stronger emphasis on its internal security networks. Now, recently, Hossein Tayyip has been promoted to the Basij commander, the commander of the Basij paramilitary unit. And for those of you that are unfamiliar with the Basij paramilitary unit, it's a paramilitary unit that is part of the Iranian law enforcement command that is geared towards suppressing civil unrest, as they call it. What it comes down to in practice is often massacring protesters, massacring demonstrators, and those who do not necessarily walk in the lines laid out to them by the Islamic Republic of Iran and their radical ruling bodies. So what this means is that Iran has, not just after the latest round of fighting, but particularly after the 12-day war in 2025, Iran has realized that one of its greatest vulnerability was its internal security structures, something that the Israelis severely targeted over the course of that 12-day war and tried to take advantage of during that 12-day period, alas, to no avail. Once again, I've talked about that numerous times, quite in depth. Watch back my previous clips if you want to hear my thoughts about that. Now, what Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei has done pretty much is he has told Hossein Tayyip to transform every Iranian into a Basiji. Now, what does this mean? Now, what this means is that Iran, this is what you need to understand first and foremost. Iran has relied, also in the past, on certain, let's call it, neighborhood security watches, which were kind of like a Gestapo body, if you will, that was said to improve and promote societal resilience, right? Making sure that Iranian society does not get compromised or sabotaged or manipulated from the inside out. What it practically comes down to in most cases is a scheme in which people who are deemed to be traitors, who are deemed to be informants, who do not necessarily approve of the policies and procedures and governing decisions of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and the Islamic Republic in general, get thrown before the bus, get whistleblowed on, get reported to the authorities, and obviously are then taken care of, in most cases either through execution or through lifelong brutal and cruel and inhumane imprisonment. Now, obviously, the mainstream legacy media won't necessarily tell you all of that, but that's pretty much what it practically comes down to. Now, strategically, what this is an endeavor by Mustafa Khamenei to improve Iranian internal security and societal resilience, as well as increasing and dramatically expanding the radicalization and indoctrination efforts and propaganda efforts of the Islamic Republic, right? If more and more Iranians, either willingly or coercively, back the Ayatollah regime, back the Islamic Republic of Iran, then any outside or inside efforts to sabotage the regime, which may lead to its potential eventual toppling or overthrow, obviously has lesser chances to succeed. So that is what Mostaiba is trying to do. Double down on internal security, which is one of the greatest vulnerabilities, or has been one of the greatest vulnerabilities in latest conflicts pertaining to Iran and the Western world and Israel. Now, what we're probably seeing is, as I've said, an increased campaign targeting so-called informants, so-called traitors, so-called deserters to the Islamic Republic, to the Iranian state, that will get whistleblowed on, that will get reported, if only to indoctrinate and to manipulate and sabotage public perception in the favor of the Ayatollah regime and the Islamic Revolution and the Islamic Republic in general. Now, Hassan Tayyip is quite an interesting figure. He has had decades of experience within the Islamic Republic of Iran, many years of which he served as the head of the intelligence organization. So he is, by any means, a figure incredibly familiar with intelligence operations, with surveillance, with covert and clandestine operations. So we will certainly see the effect of his endeavors, of his strategies, of his methodologies take effect inside Iran pertaining to their internal security in the mid to near-term future. So that brings us to Iraq, where currently a massive campaign is about to occur targeting the Iraqi militias, who, especially those Iraqi militias that thus far have refused to abide by the government's disarmament efforts. We're talking primarily about Kataib Hezbollah, who is arguably the biggest, most prominent Iranian-backed Iraqi militias of this particular moment in time. But also there are also other ones. Harakat al-Hezbollah is another one. There are multiple PMF brigades, still incredibly loyal to Iran, still with incredible influence, not just within the PMF itself, but also throughout other security frameworks and security institutions within the Iraqi state. So this collision, or the potential or eventual collision that we might be seeing in the coming weeks, has been building up for quite some time. And many analysts and many experts say it is kind of inevitable, especially if the Iraqi state is serious about truly disarming the Iranian-backed militias. Now, the problem with that endeavor is this. Do I agree that the Iraqi state needs to double down on their efforts to disarm the Iranian-backed militias? Absolutely. Do I believe they have the capacity to do so single-handedly? Absolutely not. You must understand that over the past few decades, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard has systematically infiltrated every layer of Iraqi security, frameworks and institutions, as well as political frameworks and institutions. They're in the parliaments, they're in the religious and cultural organizations, they're in the security bodies, they're in the counterterrorism services, they're in the security law enforcement services. They're pretty much everywhere. Influential Shia clerics, as well as Iranian-backed parties and entities, have spread out across the entire Iraqi society, across the entirety of Iraqi society. And now comes the time where all those endeavors are starting to bear fruit, if you will. Now, the reason why Ismail Ghani, the commander of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Quds Force, has encouraged the Iranian-backed Iraqi militias to comply with these disarmament efforts serves a perhaps even more sinister purpose. The reasons why the Iranian-backed Iraqi militias do not want to disarm is because they want to maintain their autonomy, they want to maintain their abilities to strike United States and allied targets throughout the region in order to deter United States military action, and in order to hold some sway, or at the very least pose some sort of deterrent against Iraqi security forces. Now, why does Ismail Ghani and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps want them to disarm? Very simply, because once they disarm, many of the most prominent figures within these militias were promised significant positions throughout Iraqi government and security institutions and frameworks. Meaning, once that occurs, Iran will successfully have infiltrated the highest echelons of Iraqi decision-making bodies and can thereby exert their influence freely, covertly, with plausible deniability once all the Iraqi militias are disarmed. And guess what? Once that occurs, once the Iranians are in a strong position to influence Iraqi decision-making, to influence elections, legislative elections, parliamentarian elections, you name it, then they won't need these militias to begin with, because the Iraqi security forces, the PMF, the Popular Mobilization Forces, and the Iraqi armed forces in general will, at least to a very far degree, answer to their whim. And that has been the plan of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps for decades on end, to transform Iraq into what Syria under the Assad regime was. And that's what is happening right here, right now. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps wants to transform Iraq into a second Syria, especially now that the Assad regime has fallen and Syria is no longer an active part of Iran's proxy network spanned across the region. That's always been the long-term strategy from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps in regards to Iraq. And now that strategy has become increasingly more important given the fact that the Assad regime is no longer there to support Iranian endeavors closer to the Mediterranean. And Iraq finds itself in quite a predicament, especially because, let's not forget, by the end of September, the US forces withdraw, leaving Iraq ever more vulnerable, not just to militias, but also to dormant and manipulative efforts politically, rhetorically, and societally from the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps in regards to transforming Iraq into a state that fully complies with their methodologies and pretty much serves as just another member of their already expansive proxy network. Now, these have been, in my opinion, the most significant developments that have occurred over this last week. I might do a strategy breakdown pertaining to the situation in Iraq this week or over the course of next week, because it is of quite the importance for the status quo, for the power balance currently within the Middle East. If Iraq were to become an active member of Iran's proxy network, if it were to fall to Iranian exertion, to Iranian sabotage efforts, that would prove to be a very dire development for the United States and its interests. It would prove to be a very dire development for the Gulf states and any other party that is opposed to the Islamic Republic of Iran. So I might do a strategy breakdown pertaining to that developing situation. Stay tuned for that. Once again, thank you very much for taking the time to watch my content, guys. Please leave a like beneath this clip. If you have any subjects or topics that you would like me to discuss next, please feel free to leave them in the comment section down below or reach out to me on one of my socials, and I aim to get back at you as swiftly as possible. I'm trying to grow the channel. I'm trying to figure out more subjects to discuss here on the channel. There's a lot of things happening all across the globe, within the Pacific theater, within the Middle Eastern theater, within the European theater. It's a lot, so I'm trying to take those developments that I deem to be the most significant and discuss them here on this channel. But if you have any other suggestions for me, as I've said, pitch them to me. Once again, thank you very much, and I wish you all a blessed day. Thank you. Till the next time.